Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, Mormonism with the Murph, where we do a fair and objective analysis of the church and its truth claims, its history, doctrine, and policy. So we're continuing with our multi-episode series on Joseph Smith's polygamy. If you didn't watch part 10, we had a look at John C. Bennett, who he is, and we had a look at some of the accusations and allegations he made against Joseph Smith. We had a look at the practice of spiritual wifery. We had a look at sort of like the critical arguments, then what faithful apologists have to say. So go back and watch that one if you haven't. In part 11, we're going to be looking at the proposal made by Joseph Smith to Nancy Rigdon, who was the daughter of Sidney Rigdon, who was first counselor in the first presidency, and the happiness letter. I do want to give a bit of a disclaimer. This episode is probably one that I personally find very troubling, makes me really uncomfortable, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to do it. But I feel in order to be transparent, in order to look at all the hard issues and to not hold anything back, that we need to confront, even if it makes us uncomfortable and it's really messy and really troubling. And again, I'm going to try my best to try to look at both sides and provide the evidence as objectively as I can. So let's dive in. So Nancy Rigdon, so this was around April 1842. So this comes from Joseph Smith's Polygamy. So this is how they believe it happened. So Nancy had gone to church meetings being held in a grove near the temple lot on which the Mormons were then erecting a temple. An old lady friend, Miranda Johnson Hyde, who lived alone, invited her, which Nancy did. When they got to the house and had taken their bonnets off, the old lady began to talk to her about the new doctrine of polygamy, which was then being taught, telling Nancy during the conversation that it was a surprise to her when she first heard it, but that she had since come to believe it to be true. So this is Nancy Miranda Hyde, who is the wife of Orson Hyde, who had already previously been sealed to Joseph Smith, and she's telling Nancy, and she's kind of the one on Joseph's behalf, telling her and trying to convince her of this doctrine of plural marriage. While they were talking, Joseph Smith the prophet came into the house and joined them, and the old lady immediately left the room. It was then that Joseph made the proposal of marriage to my sister. Nancy flatly refused him, saying if she ever got married, she would marry a single man or none at all, and thereupon took her bonnet and went home, leaving Joseph at the old lady's home. So this comes from LDS discussions. So after Nancy rejected Joseph Smith's proposal and the letter, which we'll come to in a few slides, she spoke out against it, and her brother John Rigdon stated that the following in a 1904 letter to Arthur Welling. Joseph Smith had said that he had made a proposal to Nancy Rigdon to become his wife, and she, like a fool, had to go and blab it. So it's very likely that the prophet told her this in secrecy, that, like he did with other wives, to not go public about this. The church attacked her viciously, as we cover in our longest post on the happiness letter. Even in 1845, Nancy Hyde's legal but not eternal husband, Orson Hyde, had this to say about the incident. So this is what Orson Hyde had to say about Nancy. During my absence to Palestine, the conduct of his daughter Nancy became so notorious in the city. According to common rumor, she was regarded generally little, if any, better than a public prostitute. Joseph Smith, knowing the conduct she was guilty of, felt anxious to reprove and reclaim her if possible. He accordingly requested my wife to invite her down to her house. He wished to speak with her and show her the impropriety of being gallanted shoot by so many different men, many of whom were comparatively strangers to her. Nancy, I presume, considered her dignity highly insulted at the plain and sharp reproofs she received from this servant of God. She ran home and told her father that Mr. Smith wanted her for a spiritual wife, and that he employed my wife to assist him in obtaining her. So according to this, Orson Hyde, so he wasn't present at the time, he was on a mission, but according to this account that, Nancy's virtue was, sort of being questioned, and that according to this account that Joseph went maybe to sort of reprove her for her behavior. I believe she was also involved with Francis Higby, who was kind of seducing and sleeping with women. So it's possible that that might have been the context, and then Joseph Smith proposed plural marriage then. And similarly, you could say that something similar happened with Sarah Pratt, and maybe that's why they then spoke out against the prophet. But at the same time, critics would say it is, well, after she rejected him, then Joseph just went and publicly smeared her character and her reputation, considering her to be no better than public prostitute, as a way to sort of strike back. So LDS discussion says, when, as happens in the cases of Mrs. Martha Brotherton and Miss Nancy Rigdon, the prophet overtures were rejected with disdain and exposure, he threatened he would set 100 hellhounds on them to destroy their reputation. That is a pattern that occurs beyond just this example. Anytime Joseph Smith is attacked, he flips those accusations against the accuser. So what the author is trying to say is that because she is pretty much talking back and pretty much going to out Joseph Smith for his advances, that he is going to strike back and destroy her reputation. So this is John C. Bennett's account of it. It may be a bit embellished, but we're going to read his account. So he says, according to what happened, Nancy, she went down, Joe was there and took her into a private room, locked the door and commenced by telling her that he had long loved her and had asked the Lord for her and that it was his holy will that he should have her. He told her that it would not prevent her from marrying any other person, that he had the blessings of Jacob granted to him, and that all was right. He desired to kiss her and wished her to kiss him, but Joe couldn't commit. She said she would alarm the neighbors if he did not open the door and let her out. He did so and requested Mrs. Hyde to explain matters to her. Joe swore her to eternal secrecy. Mrs. Hyde told her that these things looked strange to her at first, but she would become more reconciled on mature reflection. Miss Rigdon replied, I never shall. Joe agreed to write her and did so in a few days through Dr. Richards. That letter is now safe in the hands of her friends, so this is the happiness letter. I have seen it, so is her father and various other persons. On Tuesday last, Joe came up to Mr. Rigdon, accompanied by his high priest, George Miller, of Sable Sister notoriety, for a witness, and by boisterous words and violent gestures tried to deny the attempted seduction and alarm the girl. But she told him he was a cursed liar, that he could not face her to it. Joe then made a full acknowledgement of the whole affair. All the family and many other persons were present. The Holy George observed, you must not harm the Lord's anointed. The Lord will not suffer his anointed to fall. So according to John C. Bennett's account, that yes, Joseph Smith used Nancy Miranda Hyde to try to convince her, but in this account, Joe, locks the door, says that he's long loved her, that it's the Lord's will for him to marry her, that he has, the blessings of Jacob, and he's received this revelation, and he apparently tried to kiss her. Obviously, she sort of was threatening to scream, and for him to let her out, and she just flat out rejected him. And then later on, after the letter, when him and George Miller go to visit the Rigdons, Joseph Smith denies that he ever attempted to seduce or ask her to marry him. Nancy calls him a liar, and then I believe he then says it was just to test her virtue. But we're going to read more accounts. So George Robinson, this is Sidney's son-in-law, he provided his understanding of Joseph's first interview with Nancy, during which Joseph Smith claimed he had got a revelation on the subject, and God had given him all the blessings of Jacob, and that there was no sin in it whatever, but if she had any scruples of conscience about the matter, he would marry her privately, and enjoined her to secrecy, which is quite troubling. But we see this pattern with his other proposals, that he asked his wives to marry him in secret and to keep it secret, to keep it private. And when he writes the letter, he often asks them to burn the letter to destroy the evidence, which is quite troubling. Robinson claimed that Nancy repulsed him and she left him with disgust and came home and told her father. So she was very repulsed and disgusted by the proposal, and she went and told her family. So we're going to read then the happiness letter. So this would have been around the 9th of April 1842, so it would have been, I think, a few days after he first proposed to Nancy. It says, happiness is the object and design of our existence, and will be the end thereof if we pursue the path that leads to it, and this path is virtue, uprightness, faithfulness, holiness, and keeping all the commandments of God. This quote probably sounds familiar. It's been quoted many times by leaders of the church, at General Conference. throughout. This comes from Joseph Smith's happiness letter. But the context of this letter, because we're going to read a lot of it, it's in the context of him proposing plural marriage to Nancy Rigdon, and he seems to be trying to persuade her. Critics would see it as just a sexual predator using religious manipulation. So that's the context. So let's read. But we cannot keep all the commandments without first knowing them, and we cannot expect to know all, or more than we now know, unless we comply with or keep those we have already received. That which is wrong under one circumstance may be and often is right under another. God said, "Thou shalt not kill," at any other time. At another time he said, "Thou shalt utterly destroy." This is the principle on which the government of heaven is conducted, by revelation adapted to the circumstances in which the children of the kingdom are placed. Whatever God requires is right, no matter what it is, although we may not know the reason thereof till long after the event transpires. So Joseph is saying, happiness is the object and design of our existence. And, he talks about these things, virtue, faithfulness, holiness, and keeping the commandments of God. And then he talks about that we must keep all the commandments, and that sometimes a commandment might seem wrong in one circumstance and then right in another. For example, thou shalt not kill, but then we know of accounts in the Old Testament where they destroyed cities. Also Nephi when he slayed Laban. So he's saying to her that the law or the standard may be monogamy, but then sometimes God might command polygamy. And it's the principle of, it says the government of heaven is conducted by revelation adapted to circumstances. So it might seem wrong in one context, but right in another. So he says, if we seek first the kingdom of God, all good things will be added. So with Solomon, first he asked wisdom, and God gave it to him. And with it every desire of his heart, even things which might be considered abominable to all who understand the order of heaven only in part, but which in reality were right because God gave and sanctioned by special revelation. So he's saying that, we know Solomon had many wives. Solomon sought for wisdom, and although it might have been considered abominable, all the wives that he had, I know the Book of Mormon would refer to Solomon and David's practice of plural marriage and concubines as abominable in the sight of the Lord. But he's saying in this letter that in reality is right if it's sanctioned, if it's authorized by special revelation from God. Blessings offered but rejected are no longer blessings, but become like the talent hid in the earth by the wicked and slothful servant. The preferred good returns to the giver. The blessing is bestowed on those who will receive and occupy. For unto him that hath shall be given, and he shall have abundantly. But unto him that hath not or will not receive shall be taken away that which he hath or might have had. Our Heavenly Father is more liberal in his views and boundless in his mercies and blessings than we are ready to believe or receive, and at the same time is more terrible to the workers of iniquity, more awful in the execution of his punishments, and more ready to detect every false way than we are apt to suppose him to be. He will be inquired of by his children. So he's pretty much saying that this is a blessing being bestowed, but if the blessing isn't received, if she doesn't partake of plural marriage, then really it's like rejecting the blessing, and there will be consequences for that. It's like the wicked and slothful servant who did nothing with the talent that was given him. And then he's saying that Heavenly Father is more liberal and in his views than we perhaps understand. So that's sort of the essence of the letter. So this is what a critic has to say on the letter. It is truly a very uncomfortable letter, and I know for believing members it is almost impossible to believe that this letter was written to convince Nancy Rigdon to marry him. In my interview with Brian Hales in part 2, he does acknowledge he's a faithful historian and apologist, probably the church's #1 guy when it comes to polygamy, knows the documents really well. And even Brian Hales acknowledged in my 2-part interview, I'll put the link at the end of this video, there's a timestamp where we talk about Nancy Rigdon and the happiness letter, but he acknowledges that this is the context, although he believes it wasn't just to convince Nancy, but he also believes it was to convince her father as well. The problem, however, is that the church does not deny this letter was from Joseph Smith, as it has been cited by prophets, seers, and revelators, such as David O. McKay, J. Golden Kimball, James E. Faust, Thomas S. Monson, Kevin W. Pearson, Kim B. Clark, etc. Furthermore, the secret meeting with Nancy Rigdon is confirmed by both positive and negative sources, as are the follow-up meetings with the Rigdon family about the fallout from Joseph's proposal and the letter. So there's multiple accounts of Joseph's proposal to Nancy, not just from antagonistic sources like Bennett, but also more faithful, reliable sources. So one can't dismiss that this did not take place. Brian Hales even acknowledges, while some researchers may question whether Joseph was the true author, no other plausible candidate has been proposed. None of the other participants in this historical episode possess the motivation to write or the teaching style employed in the letter. Also, it is apparent that all of the doctrinal ideas voiced in the narrative can be found in the prophet's other instructions. So Nancy's response to the letter. So a lot of this comes from George W. Robinson. So Nancy showed the prophet's letter to her father and told him of the incident at the Hyde residence. Rigdon demanded an audience with Smith, so he was not happy about it when his daughter told him about the proposal. George W. Robinson reported that when Smith came to Rigdon's home, the enraged father asked for an explanation. The prophet attempted to deny it at first, Robinson said, and face her down with a lie, but she told the facts with so much earnestness, and the fact of a letter being present, which he had caused to be written to her on the same subject, the day after the attempt made on her virtue. Okay, so it was the day after the letter was written. That ultimately he could not withstand the testimony. He then and there acknowledged that every word of Miss Rigdon's testimony was true. Much later, John Rigdon elaborated that Nancy, one of those excitable women, and she went into the room and said, "Joseph Smith, you are telling that which is not true. You did not make such a proposition to me, or you did make such a proposition to me, and you know it." The woman who was there said to Nancy, "Are you not afraid to call the Lord's anointed a cursed liar?" "No," she replied, "I am not, for he does lie, and he knows it." Though only 16 at the time, it seems that Nancy was confident and poised beyond her years to the benefit of history. Joseph Smith has come to the Sidney Rigdon's home. At first, he's trying to deny that he ever made the proposal to Nancy, but she says he did. You know, "You're lying. You did make the proposition to me," and she's very strong in her testimony. Robinson wrote that Smith, after acknowledging the incident, claimed that he had propositioned Nancy because he wished to ascertain whether she was virtuous or not, and took that course to learn the facts. But the Rigdon family would not accept such an explanation, and to be honest, I don't think I would either. And in this account, it seems like Joseph Smith is not being honest. They were persuaded that the rumors about the prophet's polygamy doctrine had been confirmed. The issue continued to be a serious source of contention between the two church leaders until Smith's death in 1844. According to John Rigdon, Sidney told the family that Smith could never be sealed one of his daughters with his consent, as he did not believe in the doctrine. Rigdon preferred to keep his difficulties with the prophet private, but John C. Bennett detailed disclosures made this impossible. So, I do find this account very problematic. Even if John C. Bennett's account is embellishing things of how the prophet proposed to Nancy, if I were to think about having a young daughter and a church leader or a prophet propositioned her, in secret, wrote her this letter to try to persuade her, according to Nancy, she then showed it to her family and told them about the secret proposal, and that Joseph denied it, but then later said, "Oh, it was just to test her virtue." I would definitely question and lose trust and have real issues over that as well. So here's Bear's response. They say George Robinson, Sidney's son-in-law, so that's who was present, provided his understanding of Joseph's first interview with Nancy, during which Joseph claimed he got a revelation on the subject. God had given him all the blessings of Jacob. There was no sin in whatever, but if she had any scruples of conscience about the matter, he would marry her privately and enjoin her to secrecy. Robinson claimed that Nancy repulsed him and she left him with disgust and came home and told her father. So they say that Robinson has some credibility, though he is only a second-hand witness of what Joseph told Nancy in their first private meeting. Even the hostile Nancy's version, filtered through Robinson, affirms that Joseph framed his proposal as a matter of revelation. This use of the phrase blessings of Jacob also resonates authentically, since Joseph saw plural marriage as a culmination of promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Describing Joseph's theological justification is likely intended to be dismissive by Robinson, but it demonstrates that a good deal more was probably said, which Nancy ignored or did not understand. Joseph also mentioned marrying Nancy privately without her parents' knowledge, which is also consistent with his proposals to other adult women. Joseph's emphasis on secrecy is likewise authentic. So fair Latter-day Saints would hold the view that George Robinson, although he's a second-hand account and a witness, that he's got some credibility. He mentioned that Joseph talks about receiving a revelation, having the blessings of, Jacob, and that he also asked her in secrecy, which goes along with some of the other accounts as well. So J. Wycliffe Rigdon, so he wrote that Nancy told father and mother of it. The story got out and it became the talk of the town that Joseph had made a proposition to Nancy Rigdon to become his wife, and that she refused him. A few days after the occurrence, Joseph Smith came to my father's house and talked the matter over with the family and my sister. The feelings manifested by our family on this occasion were anything but brotherly or sisterly, I can fully understand, more especially on the part of Nancy, as she felt that she had been insulted. A day or two later, Joseph Smith returned to my father's house when matters were satisfactorily adjusted between them, and there the matter ended. So this is what fair Latter-day Saints, sort of like their view or their response to this whole incident on the Nancy Rigdon accounts of Joseph Smith's proposals. So they say it is difficult to know if Nancy was as insulted and dramatic as Robinson claims. It serves Bennett's purposes to portray her as outraged female innocence, and her family would have had equal investment in believing that Nancy fearlessly defended her virtue. But at the same time, they also would have seen Joseph Smith as a prophet, so they would have been quite torn as well. Their natural concern with clearing Nancy's name affects how we read other accounts from the Rigdon family. Long after her death, so the Britpin were saying that her family's accounts would be biased to defend Nancy Rigdon, but at the same time, they believe Joseph Smith is a prophet, so they would also maybe be slightly hesitant to want to call him out. Long after her death, Nancy's son wrote, "Someone is wrong, but I know my mother is not, for she was the person most concerned. I would believe her above any person living or dead. She was not misinformed of the circumstances. His passion and certitude are clear, but would we expect a son to feel otherwise?" Yeah, good point. Joseph Smith III had equally passionate views on Joseph Smith Jr.'s plural marriages because he trusted his mother, yet young Joseph was entirely misled. So yes, we're biased. Obviously, your family's more likely to support you. Joseph Smith's son, obviously Joseph Smith III, was more likely to believe his mother. Having decided to reject the prophet's offer, whatever its nature, Nancy herself would have wanted to appear righteously indignant for the benefit of her family and Francis Higby. Given Joseph's concern for secrecy, however, if Nancy had left hostile and belligerent, it would seem strange for him to commit his ideas to paper. If she did rebuke him as strongly as Robinson claims, why would Joseph provide her with the written evidence of his offer and then trust Nancy would destroy it unread by others? So they bring up this point, well, why would, if she rebuked him so strongly, why would he then write a letter and expect her not to sort of publicly expose it? But at the same time, it's most likely that he did author the letter, so I don't fully know what their point is here, but maybe they're just trying to say that maybe she didn't react as dramatically or as angrily as Bennett or Robinson portray her as doing. If, however, Joseph confronted Nancy with a reprimand for immoral behaviour, she may have been ashamed and taken back. A proposal of plural marriage would have only surprised her further, and she may have then left in a much more subdued or ambiguous manner. As with Sarah Pratt, Joseph may have hoped to both tie himself closer to a prominent leader, while also redeeming a wayward relation. If we grant Nancy the benefit of the doubt, we might conclude that Joseph only cautioned her about closer attachment to Francis Higby and urged plural marriage as a better option than pursuing a relationship with Francis, because I believe Francis was going around and seducing women. Such a marriage would have protected Nancy and also bound Joseph to Sydney. In either scenario, plural marriage could have been astonishing enough to send Nancy away thinking rather than shouting. So they're trying to state that maybe Joseph propositioned her, one, because of her close relationship with Francis Higby, maybe that he did sort of rebuke her a bit for any immoral behavior if she wasn't being virtuous, and then maybe also proposed plural marriage similar to what people think happened with Sarah Pratt, and that she didn't react in such a dramatic manner. I do have to say, though, I think this is it's plausible, but I think this is speculation from Feral Latter-day Saints here, and they're really just trying to do this to make Joseph Smith, to put him in as good a light as possible. But again, I don't think the evidence is strong for this position, but it's possible. Despite the drama of these events, Van Wagner tells us neither Nancy Rigdon or Sarah Pratt stood to gain from exposing the prophet's prurience. None had obvious political motives to hurt him. So Feral Latter-day Saints say this is sheer nonsense. If Sarah or Nancy was guilty of sin, as Joseph and others claimed, then they had every reason to undercut Joseph. But yeah, possibly they could have spoke out if he had rebuked them for any immoral behavior. But at the same time, he was the prophet. He was, revered and respected. So it is quite a bold move to try to expose him and call him out. Political considerations are irrelevant. Having made the decision to share the letter with Francis, Nancy effectively informed Bennett, who knew exactly what to use to make of this gift the prophet had handed them. Under the influence of Bennett and Higby, Nancy had several days to tell and retell her story. Memory is fickle and fluid. If Nancy had been immoral with Higby, she had a motive to paint the man who could unmask her in the worst light. So they're kind of making the same thing. If Joseph, same thing with Sarah Pratt, if Joseph Smith knew that Sarah Pratt and John C. Bennett were having an affair, that he could have exposed them, and he could have portrayed them in a bad light. So that might be why they're fighting back. Again, I think this is somewhat speculation. If Nancy had done nothing wrong, Bennett and Higby likely did little to encourage her to seek the revelatory guidance to which other plural wives had recourse. Okay. So this was quite a long one. And again, I know this is probably a very problematic and troubling one. Unless you've done a lot of research into church history, you may not have even heard of this before. Even whenever I first went through my faith crisis, I didn't learn about Nancy Rigdon and the Happiness Letter until recent years. So I'm going to give a bit of a conclusion on it. So it does appear that Joseph Smith did propose marriage to Nancy Rigdon with the assistance of Nancy Miranda Hyde in April 1842. It seems that Nancy did refuse his proposal. Whether or not you believe John C. Bennett's accounts or Robinson's account, it seems that there definitely was a proposal made. Bennett's account tries to make it seem like it was very much a romantic proposal and that he was almost trying to seduce her. Orson Hyde's account indicates that Nancy had a reputation for having a lack of virtue and being engaged in immoral behavior. Apologists surmise that perhaps Joseph was just trying to protect her from Francis Higby, and that he then made an offer of plural marriage. After being refused, Joseph writes a letter stating that happiness is the object and sign of our existence. In the letter, he urges her, to keep the commandments. That which seems wrong in one circumstance can be right in another, to receive this blessing come from God, that it's not abominable if God sanctions it. While we don't know for 100% sure, it seems most likely that the candidate was Joseph Smith as the author, and Brian Hales would also hold that view. Whenever Joseph went to Sidney Rigdon's house and they had the confrontation, at first Joseph tried to deny claims that he advanced plural marriage to Nancy, but then he later said, whenever she sort of boldly testified against him and accused him of being a liar, he said, okay, I did, but it was just to test her virtue. I think the family did not accept his explanations. The matter was resolved quietly, but apparently Rigdon wouldn't consent to his daughter marrying the prophet, and there's contention between Sidney Rigdon and Joseph Smith until the end of his life. The letter appears to be trying to persuade Nancy to accept plural marriage and that it is a commandment, and will bring her eternal happiness, and that God has sanctioned it. Critics would point at this as being religious manipulation of the prophet, trying to coerce and persuade her into marrying him. Apologists would maybe try to see it. I know Brian Heels would try to see it as, he was trying to convince her. I think there's no argument against that. I think Brian Heels held the view of he was also trying to convince Sidney Rigdon. Honestly, I don't think there's a really good apologetic response to this. Whether or not you believe John C. Bennett's accounts are a bit embellished or not, I still find this probably one of the most troubling and problematic areas of Joseph Smith's polygamy, and I would have huge issues with it if I were Sidney Rigdon. But again, look through the documents yourself, read through the sources. I'll put links in the description if you want to find out more. There's also a very critical analysis done by, I forgot his name. He's the guy that done Joseph Smith, Thinker of Thoughts. I'm so sorry that I forgot. Jonathan Streeter. He does an analysis of the happiness ladder as well. It is very critical as well, and he would see Joseph Smith as a sexual predator, and it was religious manipulation. But you can have a look at what critics have to say as well. In the next part, we're going to be looking at William Law and the Nauvoo expositor. William Law was in the First Presidency, and he had real issues with Joseph Smith's practice of polygamy, and that is what was written in the Nauvoo expositor. We're going to be looking more into that in the next episode. If you've enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe. If you want to follow me, you can on my Facebook page, Mormonism with the Murph. And if you care to donate to support me to create more content, as I am devoting a lot of time to doing this and trying to do interviews with historians, experts, scholars, I would really appreciate any donations that people could give. But at least, please just like and share this video and subscribe to my channel. And I will see you all very soon. Take care, everybody.